going now. I'll take
Okay.
blaring glasses off. Okay. Well, this time we're here with Juan Canales. Juan, how you doing?
Not bad at all. At least today, we're doing fine.
Doing fine. Well, doing fine is good. Um, Juan is from Tlaxcala. I've heard that Tlaxcala is like the cuna de la República. Is that right?
That's what they say.
Yeah.
And that's actually what the government has in a lot of signs over here. It's Cuna de la Nación.
Cuna de la Nación, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Culo no. Culo.
Cuna
Yeah, Cuna de la Nación.
de la Nación. Yep.
Yeah, and and yeah, I saw that on a license plate once. It just kind of like stuck with me ever since.
Yeah.
But you do teach English to people. What kind of people do you teach English to?
Well, I've been teaching English for over 12 years now. I mean, formally, I could say that formally because I've taught in other ways. But I teach mainly teenagers and students from that student in the university. But during the last couple of years, I've been also teaching to to some teachers from SEP.
Okay.
So it's usually about teaching theory, but also some grammar points for teachers that want to improve their grammar skills.
Okay.
And in other ways, also their teaching skills. Yeah.
When you say SEP, you're referring to public schools, right? The Secretaría de Educación Pública? Yeah.
Yeah, basically teachers from PRONI.
Yeah.
Because that's the way it's still called, around the country. So
yeah, PRONI. That's the Programa Nacional de Inglés, right?
Yeah. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. I teach mainly. Sometimes I teach too.
Okay. Well, let me ask you: how old were you when you started learning English?
Well, the very first class that I had was I remember I was 11 years old because I was still in elementary school. And actually, my uncle was a teacher. So I was basically pushed to go to those courses in my hometown. But yeah, it was when I was 11 years old. That was the very first course that I took.
And you loved it?
I have fond memories about that course. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I really liked English and Spanish and English and all those subjects that were related to grammar or words. I just loved those subjects, and I also listened to a lot of music. Well, from the United States, from England, from Australia. So, I remember that I used to see song or song's title, listen to a song, and I always wanted to know what it meant in Spanish. And I used to go to my uncle's and ask him because he was a teacher, and he was like, "Oh, this is this and that." And when he started with this project in my hometown, my mother sent me, and yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. We were just like, at the beginning, we were like 20 kids, going there. But as time progressed, as always, we were like 7 left at the end.
Yeah, that's normal. That's typical.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean,
you couldn't leave because it was your uncle, right?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So I remember he would tell my mother if I was there.
Yeah.
if I was absent, so I had to go.
Yeah. And the other 6 were your cousins, right?
No, actually, I was the only one because my brother is 5 years older than me.
Okay.
So at the time he was in his rebellious stage, so he wasn't pushed to go to those classes, but I was. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's all right. And how old were you when you finally felt like you had a good command of the English language?
Well, I would say that happened when I was in university, because actually I studied languages. It's called lenguas modernas. That is the fancy name that they gave to this career.
Yeah.
Now I think it's different, but okay. At the time it was called lenguas modernas, and I studied English and French. But English was my target language. French was my second language. But I think that when I was in university, around the second year, I would say that at that time I really felt comfortable with what I was able to do with English. Because before that, I only had this course with my uncle.
Yeah.
And regular school, public school. Yeah.
Okay. And in that path to get where you were at that point, did you have a lot of opportunity to use it outside of a classroom setting?
No, well, no, not at all. No, not at all. Because, tell me.
How many hours a week did you actually go to class?
Well, with this very first course that I was talking about, I recall that I used to go twice a week.
For how long?
Yeah, it was 1 hour, 1.5 hours. So
okay.
90 minutes. I remember it was like Tuesdays and Thursdays around 4 after lunch. So it was around 4 and 90 minutes of English. And that was pretty much it. And at the time, I told you, I was in elementary school. And in those years, we didn't have English in elementary school.
Okay.
Yeah.
No English at all, or just classes, English classes that were basically next to not having classes?
Well, I mean, we didn't have any classes in elementary school. No, nothing. Yep.
Okay.
It was a different system at the time.
Yeah. When was the first time that you actually began having contact with native English speakers in a real world setting?
Well, now that you mentioned that, I remember that in elementary school, there was one kid whose grandparents were Mexican. Actually, they lived by my mother's house.
Yeah.
But this kid was born in the United States, so he was a native speaker. I met him there in elementary school. He was there for maybe half a year, something like that. And he kind of spoke Spanish. It was broken Spanish. And well, our English skills were really really poor. So we tried to communicate with certain words or certain expressions, but that was pretty much it. Nothing else. And after that, the real experience came when I was in university, because in there, there were teachers from the United States, and there were some people that were there because of certain exchanges, or they were just living in Puebla for a while. Yep.
That's interesting, because you right now, how old are you now?
34.
34.
Yeah.
And everybody can see that you're able to speak very fluently now. And so,
well, I like to think that I can, but yeah, I mean, I'm happy with my abilities nowadays.
Yeah, and anybody who had to talk with you or work with you or do any sort of conversation with you in English would also be happy with those abilities as well. Do you remember anything in life that kind of represented a transition phase for you that went from, I kind of know a lot of English, but I don't speak it very well, to a point where like you are now, and you have a fairly good ability, you have a good ability and you're very happy with your ability now. I mean, do you remember a point in history that represented kind of a transition phase from that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it happened when I was in university as well. When I was there, if I recall correctly, we had 8 courses of English. At the time, it was called Lengua Meta Uno, Lengua Meta Dos, blah, blah, blah,
Like
right?
8 levels?
Yeah, 8 levels.
All right.
So when I was in Lengua Meta Siete, so it was the seventh level,
Yeah.
My English teacher at the end of the course, well, she talked individually to, to us, to every one of us. And she told me that my English was pretty good and that I was able to communicate fairly and that I could have a conversation without any problems. So at that point, I was really happy about that. I was like, okay, cool, that's great. Because let me tell you something. When people from my hometown, I mean, friends from my childhood, they asked me about what I was studying, and I said it's like I study English, I study languages, translation, to be more precise. But they thought that I was like learning the colors and and how to count from 1 to 1,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
So once that I had a course, which was not that formal, but I had a course in my hometown, and one of them listened to me. And he was like, "Oh, cool! You speak English?" I said, well, "Yes, that's what I've been doing during the last 3 years." But I felt happy at that time. I remember that. Now that you asked me that, I remember that in Lengua Meta Siete, that teacher told me that, and I really felt happy about what I was doing. Yeah.
Well, good. Yeah. It's interesting to listen to everybody's histories because there are so many different I can always edit all of this out, but there are so many different paths that people take to get to their point of whether fluent in the language that they might try to be learning.
Yeah.
Some people it takes years. You have to admire people who it takes many years to get from point A to to a point of where they're fluent, because it's very easy to just give up and leave it. If it's taking a long time to do, and you don't have a lot of opportunity in the outside world to actually use it anywhere.
Yeah.
Some people learn it very quickly. Some people start at different ages. And so when you mentioned you started at 11, that's an interesting point of perspective as well. One of the things we were going to talk about today is in the classroom, for example, when people take classes, there are different philosophies, and two very competing philosophies are one where in the classroom, do I ever use the student's native language, or do I only use what we call in the language world the L2, right? The target language. And met a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas, met a lot of teachers with a lot of different ideas. As a learner, I'm not concerned about what the teacher thinks is a good idea. As a learner, I'm just concerned about what I think is a good idea.
Yeah.
But for you, when you were going through this process, maybe from the age of 11 with your uncle, all the way up to, when you finished the university, what did you experience regarding that? Did you experience classes that were strictly one way or classes that were another way? Was it all one particular way?
Well, yeah, I remember that when I was with my uncle in this course I was talking about, my uncle used to use Spanish, but also English for certain instructions. He was like saying just like certain words so we could pay attention.
Yeah.
Basically that, pay attention over here, listen, okay, or talk. And he used to use also his hands,
Yeah.
some body language so we could understand what he was saying.
Right.
But he used Spanish as well. And I remember that a lot. I remember that at the time he used to use the tape recorder. It was not even a CD player at the time. It was something
we're all old enough. We remember those days.
Yeah. And he was like, okay, pay attention and listen. And I remember those words from those days. Um, and then when I started a secundaria, I was, well, the next year, basically, I was 12 years old and I started secundaria. I had a teacher that was, in my opinion now that I see it, she was a very good teacher. She was very strict, one of those teachers that, you know, times have changed.
Okay.
Nowadays, teachers are not that strict, but she was just mean in some ways.
Yeah.
She used physical punishment. she caned the students. Thankfully, you know, I was.
See how effective it is? It's effective. Yeah.
Well, but I remember that she spoke Spanish the whole class.
Okay.
The whole class. And the only English that we used as students was, good morning, class. Good morning, teacher. How are you? Fine, thanks. And you? I'm fine. Sit down. Thanks. That was it.
Did she know English, or do you know if she knew English?
According to what she told me at the time, she did know English. The problem was that, and I understand that now that I am a teacher, that in a room with 35 kids, and in which, well, you know, most of us had different backgrounds, she had to use Spanish just to make her class faster.
Yeah.
But she was a good teacher, in my opinion. I learned a lot from her. Okay. But the problem in there is that, well, we basically used L1, and I don't know if you have talked about this, but I also learned with grammar translation. I mean, I basically grew up with that in my life.
What do you mean when you say grammar translation? Because in my experience, I've run across so many definitions of what that is. I think my experience, I could say that if 5 people are talking about grammar translation at the same time, it's very easy to perceive that in each of their heads, they have a different idea of what that is.
All righty. Look,
all of them are valid ideas, but yeah.
In that case, I mean that basically she explained something in English, and she gave us a, I wanted to find a very nice word for it, but it's like the equivalence, let's say, in Spanish. Because she also used to say that there were, I mean, languages are different.
Yeah.
We have equivalences, like, you know, this is like the equivalent to these. She used to teach in that way.
So what does she say? Like, okay, students, open your books. Abran los libros.
Well, not in that way, but I'm talking more. She was more focused to grammar. For example, presente perfecto. You know, I remember that way. She was like, okay, presente perfecto. I have studied English. Equals, he estudiado inglés.
Okay, now I
have es un auxiliar, como haber.
Yeah.
Pasado participio, hado, ido, toso, cho, en español.
Okay.
And you know, those words, or the way that she taught, just stuck in my mind. It's stuck in my mind, and
yeah.
And basically, I learned in that way.
Well,
most of my life. Yeah.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because well, I'm a big believer in that way of teaching. Basically, you know, and I started with that way of teaching, and over the history that, well, you know, the 13, 14 years I've been teaching, I've been through the whole pinball machine of, you know, points and perspectives about how to look at that, and if that's good or that's bad, or who that works for and who that doesn't work for, and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But I started off with that idea of teaching. And like I say, I've run into a lot of people who it works for, and I've run into a lot of people who it doesn't seem to work for, which validates arguments against that form of teaching. you hate to sound like the broken record or the cliche of saying, well, you know, all students are different. It's a truth, but you hate to keep going on that. Well, all students are different. They are. They are. All students are different. It just gets old having to remind yourself of that all the time,
Yeah.
or to bring it up in a conversation, I guess. Um, but it's interesting to know that for you it was very helpful. I think for people that are very analytic about how a language works, and if they stop to think about how their own language works,
Mm-hmm.
I think seeing that kind of presentation is very helpful. If you have students that don't even are not even interested in reflecting on how their own language works, I think that way it just kind of goes in one side of the head and right out the other.
Yeah.
And so for some students, for me as a learner, seeing presentations like that was very helpful. It was very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, a couple of years ago, I was talking to a principal. I used to work with her, and we were talking about the way in which we learn English. And she told me that, well, her learning was, let's say, very natural. She acquired the language rather than, than really. Yeah, she told me that.
Yeah.
And I told her that for me was quite the opposite. And I remember I told her, or I told her about this anecdote that I told you now.
Yeah.
That for me it was like that. That when the teacher presented a topic, like it really stuck in my mind. Like the same with present continuous. Like I am running, estoy jugando, and I got like that, and I learned in that way. For me, it was really helpful.
Yeah.
And you're right. And now that I am, well, later on as a teacher, well, present perfect, past perfect, the perfect tenses, I believe they are some of the most difficult topics for students, because sometimes they don't grasp the idea or they don't understand how to use it, you know. And for me, it was always
starts with just calling it perfect. You know?
Yeah. And for me, it was
perfect,
really,
and that completely throws everybody's idea out of what does that even. The brain just doesn't even bother with that word. It sees that word and it kind of just tries to find a place for it. And okay, I'll set you here for right now. Perfect, whatever that's supposed to mean. And you just kind of keep going, and later, yeah. Stupid grammar terms.
For example, in your case, when you learned Spanish, did you learn about the tenses?
Well, I did, but not immediately. I started learning really late when I was, I think in the previous podcast, I mentioned I was 27 when I started learning. And, my English grammar was good because I had a very good implicit understanding of English grammar. If I were to write an essay, for example,
Mm-hmm.
the essay would be written well. And nonetheless, the knowledge that I had of English, it was just the typical implicit knowledge that every native speaker has.
Mm-hmm.
If you said something incorrectly, I would correct you and say, no, you have to say it this way, for example. Just like in Spanish, everybody corrects, if you say something incorrect. But I didn't have any explicit knowledge. At one point, third, fourth, fifth grade, all the students study English grammar, but it makes so little sense to anybody in the third, fourth, or fifth grade, especially when you're studying of your own language that you already speak. There's nothing in it that reveals itself to you that's important for any reason. Then, I remember making sentence diagrams in the fifth grade. It was just torture. Having to put, preposition or conjunction or who cares? Remember that. So as an adult, I was probably about 6 months into Spanish, just like with basically an English-Spanish dictionary, and trying to put sentences together based on, words that you pull out of the dictionary, and just like, put a sentence together really stupidly. And it didn't occur to me that verbs conjugated, not in any explicit sense, it didn't. It didn't, when I wanted to look up, what did you eat yesterday? You try to make up sentences, for people at work or whatever, they're Mexican and they don't speak English. You try to talk to them. And you say, well, what did you eat yesterday? And, your sentence that you would put together is, ¿tú qué hacer comer ayer? It comes out like that.
Yeah.
Why I wasn't making the connection that I don't know. I'm just seeing the words and trying to put them together. I called a number in a newspaper for somebody who was giving Spanish classes, and I went with this woman who was giving classes for, I don't know, maybe 3 months. I went with her 1 hour a week. And our first session that we had together, she explained to me, she goes, I'm impressed by your willingness to try to say things in Spanish. She goes, but you have no concept of conjugations or anything.
Yeah.
Go out and get the book, the 501 verbs. I said, okay, so I left there and I got the book. It's just like this little like Bible looking thing. And
yeah.
It's just pages and pages and pages of conjugation tables. And when you open it, there's nothing in there that indicates to you what any of it means, because it's all Spanish. There's nothing that tells you, for example, in your own language, what this refers to or that refers to. You might see things like futuro, and you say, okay, well, I imagine that's future, or presente, you say, okay, I imagine that's present. But when you see something like pretérito, you can't make any visible connection right at the beginning, that has anything to do with.
And what about pasado pluscuamperfecto?
Yeah, that's a favorite,
Yeah.
Where's words like that come from?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll see those things, and it was kind of overwhelming. And but I started noticing, because you sit down, you have breakfast or lunch. I lived by myself, so you get out the book, you just flip through it and flip through it and flip through it, and you started to notice that all the conjugation tables had similarities. Everything kind of followed a pattern.
Pattern,
You know what the pattern means, but you can see that there's a pattern there. And you start to see, I was just overwhelmed by it. How many different ways can you make a verb? It's one word. How many different ways can you say this word? But as I started to notice the patterns, then that kind of helps take some of the mystery out of it. It's like when you see all the stars in the sky and they just look randomly up there. They're so random. But when somebody points you out different constellations and whatnot, you start to recognize that, that it's not as random. It is, but you make sense out of the randomness because you can see the patterns and things.
Yeah.
So once I started, I went back to the teacher and I asked her, and I said, look, I'm seeing these patterns here. I said, can you tell me? I'm going to give you 3 or 4 of these. Can you just write the English equivalent next to this and the English equivalent next to this and this and this? I said, with that, I can, I'll come back next week with more, right? But once I started seeing the patterns like that, and I started to understand what they referred to in terms of what, not necessarily in what English does, but just in what they're communicating. If I say trabajo, I can see the end of that and know that refers to me, right? If I see trabajamos, I can see the end of that, the amos, and I know that refers to us, right?
Yeah.
So you start to see those, and you make those connections, and suddenly things start to make more sense. But yeah, I had to. Fortunately, I met somebody who told me, you need to look at this stuff. And when I looked at it long enough to start to see some patterns, and then I, I was interested in figuring it out.
All righty.
Yeah, I mean, from there on, things started the puzzle started coming together a lot faster.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. Look, well, in that way, well, you saw the patterns in the language, and in my case, something similar. I mean, I just noticed that some English tenses had an equivalent in Spanish. I noticed that, I remember that, and in that way, for me, it was easy to learn and to remember, to memorize those things.
What's an example of what you mean when you say some things had an equivalent? Because
Well,
there are
I mean, for example, I'm talking about now let's talk about conditionals as well.
yeah, okay. I'm following you now.
Some people, conditionals are quite difficult, but for me, it's like, oh, come on, it's in Spanish, we do basically the same. I mean, I know certain things are different, but we do the same, and we have these three conditionals, well, in English, four, but anyway, and it follows more or less the same pattern, like, sí, yo quiero esto, coma, even with that punctuation, voy a hacer esto, and we can change it. So that's what I mean with what I noticed when I was learning, and I was like, okay, it's like Spanish, a little bit like Spanish. What else? Well, some other tenses, not with words, because sometimes not with words, but in tenses and in certain sentences, or the structure of certain sentences, I noticed that, and that helped me remember how to use English.
Yeah.
So that was in as I was telling you, that happened when I was in secundaria. When I started high school, I also had a very good teacher, and but I only had 1 year of English in high school.
Okay.
I remember 2 semestres, and that was all at the time.
Okay.
But and with that teacher, the same. We were in high school. We were horrible teenagers. So the teacher used, she used mainly L1. She spoke Spanish most of the time.
Yeah.
And she used the Spanish as a way to discipline some of my classmates. But one very good thing that she did, in my opinion, was translation.
Okay.
Now, some teachers don't like translation. Some authors say translation is not necessary if you want to be able to speak English, which is true in some ways.
Again, I think it comes down a lot to how somebody is seeing translation in their mind when they talk about it. Because you could talk about translation in a lot of different, what one person means when they're talking about translation might be completely different from what somebody else has in mind when they're thinking about translation.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe professionally, or they think about that. But in the case of this teacher, it was like she used. Well, I remember that she made us translate like a paragraph, of a text from English into Spanish.
All right.
And some other times, some silly songs. I remember that she made us translate Mambo Number 5. It was a very popular song.
What was it called?
Mambo Number 5. Mambo Number 5.
Maybe I've heard that name before.
Yeah, it was a very popular song.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the century.
Yeah.
And it was just a stupid song, but it really, it helped me too. I mean, we had the lyrics, and I tried to translate like the sentences, and I saw their connections. For example, that helped me a lot because I noticed that you can say in Spanish que, but in English you can use what, that, than, and I really learned that basically when I was translating songs with her.
Yeah.
I remember that there was a line that was like, it's all what I need, or something like that. Or what I need is this. And when I tried to translate, I was like, come on, that should be like lo que, right? It was like in Spanish like that.
Yeah.
And teacher was like, "Oh yes, you're correct. That's it." So, in that way, that was also L1, basically use of L1.
Yeah.
That helped me a lot too at the time.
Well, it's interesting because these days, it gets a lot of bad rap. Um, uh, Students that would go to a class and find that approach to be very boring, for example.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
that doesn't feel any attachment to the real world. In your case, how did you take a class like that was just, here, translate this song or translate this paragraph? Um, I could ask you what about that was interesting to you. Um, but if you were explaining that, I might want to ask also, how was it interesting to you?
Mm, well, first of all, I think, well, when I say that she made us translate, I mean, it was just like one part of the activities. Because at the beginning, we listened to the song, or we used to do something else besides that. And when we were into the lyrics or into the translation, well, part of it was because during my school years, I think that I was, let's say, a good student, and I mean I mean it that I respected my teachers, and I also tried to work. If they said, okay, we have to do this, I try to follow them, no matter how boring was it. But in the case of this teacher, I mean, I liked the class. Class was interesting. She was like, okay, we're going to translate this one. And although I didn't really like the song, it was meaningful for me because I liked her class. And in a way, it was like, okay, let's see if I can do this. It was also, it encouraged me. It's like
Yeah.
the fact that I had to discover if I was able to translate or to remember certain words or certain expressions at the time. Because my level at the time was very, very low, but I was just trying to learn more. Yep.
Well, it's funny. I mean, you were a teenager at that time, and there's a lot of literature that talks about how one of the pitfalls that adult learners fall into when they're learning a new language is to always revert to trying to translate something because their memorization skills are not that of what a child's are. So adult, what memorization has to do with it, I can't be completely sure. But I was reading something recently that was talking about that and how, as a result, adults tend to try to translate things, which, again, I'm never going to tell an adult not to translate something if the adult wants to do it. The adults that really want to learn, they're going to grasp at any tool that's within reach to try to do what they need to do. And because they're an adult, they're a big enough person to figure out if it works for them or if it doesn't. I don't think they need a teacher to tell them that this is the way to do it, or that's not the way to do it, or don't do that, or it's bad, or whatever. It's just a natural part of the way that we think. Now, if you want to make the argument that says, well, that's what makes you less equipped to learn a language than a child does, I guess you can make that argument, but the adult learner isn't going to be able to go back to being a child. So, you've got what you got, and you have a lot, and you have a lot of things as an adult that children don't. You have an ability, you have a very well developed cognitive skills that allows you to put information together very quickly and see structures that children are not able to put together. That's an advantage that an adult has. And translation is a tool that's involved in that, and sometimes it's used properly and sometimes it's not. But the adult can figure that out on their own. I mean, I don't know if I feel like sometimes that teachers sometimes put themselves in a position of it's my responsibility to make sure that this learner never runs into an embarrassing situation because he was taught well by me, right? The learner needs to be aware of that. It's sometimes teachers are trying too hard to make sure that you don't make a mistake, and it doesn't. At the end of the day, you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah, I mean,
Sometimes translation works and sometimes it doesn't, and
yeah, I mean,
you'll figure it out.
committing mistakes is part of learning.
Yeah,
that's how you learn. That's how you experiment and how you discover what's good and what's not.
yeah. I
Yeah.
I don't know if I would. It's uh, if a student came to me and say, "Teacher, I'm at home and I've been trying to translate these paragraphs, and I'd like to see if you would look at it and tell me, where, if I've made any errors or things like that." I'd be glad to look at something like that, but I wouldn't. I don't think in the year 2020 I would make a class where I had students translate stuff. But if one wanted to do it, sure, I would encourage it because it's proactive. Do something, right? If you feel like that's something that's interesting to you and it works for you, do it.
Yep. Look, and about that, well, as years went by, after I finished high school, well, I was telling you this class was when I was 15 years old.
Yeah.
That was the first year of high school. Then
Back
I
in
started
1982, 1980, 1982, 15. No,
it was now 2000, the year 2000, and after that, I started to study languages when I was 19 in Puebla, the University of Puebla. And one of the activities that I did, by myself, it was not a task that any teacher demanded. I translated songs. At the time, I remember that at the time I was really into Bob Dylan and folk music. At the time, that was my folk music stage.
Is it possible to translate Bob Dylan into any other language?
Oh, I know that's kind of weird, right? But yeah. I remember I used to check his songs. I remember I had the Greatest Hits album, and those were the most popular songs. And I checked the lyrics and I tried to translate, and that helped me a lot to to retain a lot of language, a lot of vocabulary. So that was a good idea for me. But that was something that I did. I liked it, and I started with that teacher. And as I told you, even though I didn't like the songs that she assigned, I translated them, and it was like cool for me. Okay, I'm going to do it, and it really helped me that way.
Well, with the songs you don't like, you can translate them your own way, right? And you can make you can make like animal porn lyrics or something like that, and say, well, this is what I hear when I hear the song. Yeah.
That was my third experience in English. That was my uncle's course, then secundaria, then preparatoria, high school, and then, at the end of the day, I just decided to study languages. Okay. Because actually, I studied literature for a year, and I don't know. I was 17, I was 18, and something happened, and I changed my career. My father asked me if I was going to study something or not. And I told him, okay, yes, I'm going to study something.
You meant like other than literature?
Yeah, because I quit literature.
Okay, yeah.
My mother was upset because my mom is more strict. But my father was like, okay, what are you going to do? So I decided to go for languages. And when I started languages, my classes, even from the beginning in English, meta uno, my classes were taught in English. So that was something new for me, totally new for me.
Okay.
I remember the very first day of classes in the year 2003. And I remember that the teacher just, she entered, she said, good morning, everybody. And she just started, teaching in English and speaking English.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, Jesus. And well, after that, she explained in Spanish. She said, okay, toda la clase se va a tomar en inglés and this and that. And the first semester that you have in this school, this is your only English class. You will have also Spanish, you will have some other classes. But from the, yeah, when you start the second semester, you will have your classes in English only. And at the time I was like, I was like shocked.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. So everything will be in English, but I'm here to learn English. How is it possible?
Yeah.
But I think, I managed to get through that. Yeah.
I think that's it's kind of a daring program to do like that, because you know that a lot of people are not going to be well prepared to be able to take that on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's very useful to have all of your courses. This was a university, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, you're talking about young adults, very young, the youngest of adults. Still, you go into that role, and it's very useful in terms of being in a situation where you have little choice other than to produce English to make it happen, or produce the target language, better to say, to make it happen. It's one of those things that kind of, I've talked to a lot of students and learners, and they fill out like a job application, for example, and they'll ask me, what should I put as my percentage of English? How much do I know? I said, well, what do you think it is? I don't know, maybe like 40% or something. I said, well, put 80%. But why, right? I said, because they're not going to hire you. They're not going to hire you if you have only 40%. You know that, right? Yeah. I said, do you want the job? Of course, that's why I'm applying for it. I said, well, lie and put 80% or 90 or whatever. But I said, what other choice do you have if you're going to get the job? And they're not going to hire you at only 40%. Well, that's why I'm taking this class, because I need to get better. I said, you're not going to get better until you get that job. And that job is going to make you better. That job is going to make you better 100 times more effectively than this class is. Get in that job. And it's going to be, and if you do get the job, it's going to be a headache every day for 6 months, because you're going to be like in over your head. But it's that thing that's going to get you to the next level, of your language. You have to do it that way. You have to jump in and really make it work that way. The class doesn't put enough of that real need on you to learn. Like if you got this job, then, and you don't want to lose this job, and you think this job is, maybe you hate it, maybe you love it, but you have to keep it, whatever. You got two things. You can hate your life to keep this job, or you can completely turn it around and go for it, and, invest in a big giant jar of Tylenol, and, by the time you get to the bottom of it, you're going to know a lot more. You're going to know a lot more English than you did in the beginning. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a program like that, your university, I think it's daring. Some people are gonna sink, and other people are gonna learn to swim. So
yeah. You're right about that. I remember that when I started university, I didn't speak English at the time. I knew certain things. I understood certain tenses. But all in all, I had no experience in the language. And within my classroom, that we were about 30 people there, 25 people in the classroom, I still remember that there were only like 5 people who understood what the teacher was saying. Yeah. And the rest of the class, or of my classmates, were like, they were asking, like, hey, what is she? Well, ¿qué dijo? ¿Le entendiste? ¿Le entendiste? And the ones that had a little, we had a a decent level, we were like, okay, she said this and she said that. And as my career progressed, I remember that it happened through my whole career. I had different teachers. I had a teacher from Texas. I had a teacher from Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And geez, I mean, when he was speaking, it was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
My classmates still, I mean, I had classmates that didn't really understand what they were saying. That was problematic for them, really problematic.
Sure it is. People from all different parts of the world, you know. It's difficult for me to listen to Spanish from Spain. I just, you know, I can't, sometimes I even get annoyed by it. I don't like the lisp. And I don't, you know, if somebody from Spain hears this podcast, I don't mean to offend, but when your entire perspective is American Spanish, you know, South American, Central American, just American, this side of the planet Spanish, and you hear you know, it almost sounds like somebody's talking with a Jolly Rancher under the tongue, you know, un caramelo bajo la boca.
Yep.
And the lisp and everything. And so, you know, you'll watch a lot of movies that are dubbed in Spanish, and it's always the peninsular Spanish, you know, no, just turn it off. I can't listen to it. You know, you hear somebody from Australia or from Ireland or at least different countries where English is the native language, but the accent is so strong, you know, that it's very hard. So yeah, that's a challenge.
It happened to me, you know, with people from South Africa.
Okay.
For me, that what the English that they speak, I mean, at the beginning for me was really difficult to, you know, to catch what they were saying. It was like, oh, come on, could you repeat, please? Because I didn't really understand what you said.
Yeah.
That happened to me with people from South Africa, Australia as well at the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, if I listen to someone from Australia, it's like, oh, wow, that's difficult for me.
Yeah, you know, or even when you hear like Cubans or Venezuelans, where they have a tendency to just cut the S off of everything when they speak. That makes it a little harder as well.
You know, sometimes when that happens to me, well, from a teacher's point of view, sometimes some of my students are a little bit worried, and even good students that handle English very well, they are sometimes concerned. They tell me like, you know, teacher, I listened to this person. It was really difficult for me to understand, and I felt bad. I couldn't understand. And I say, oh, come on. If you go to Veracruz or if you go to Tabasco, some people that speak your own language, and they speak sometimes so fast, and you have to take what? Yeah. Didn't understand anything. So take it easy.
It is. It's really hard. One of the things I mentioned in the podcast before was that the one thing that when you're in a situation like that in your university, for example, and you go to a class and it's all English, and some people are like, what did he say? Or I don't know what he said, or, you know, whether you completely shut it all out or whether you get really invested in trying to hear it, it has a lot to do with the subject matter itself. If you're very interested in the subject matter that's being discussed, you're going to try and you're going to put a lot more effort into understanding everything that the person is saying. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to have a lot more success in understanding what the other person is saying. It just means you're going to put a lot more effort into it, and you're going to feel a lot more bothered by the fact that you don't understand exactly what he said. And being bothered in that way sometimes is a good motivator. You go home or you go talk to that person afterward and say, look, I know you were talking about this, but you said something, I just couldn't quite catch what it was that you meant. It's when people are kind of invested in the subject matter that's being discussed, regardless of the language, they kind of want to know whether the person that's speaking agrees with them or not, you know, or better, do I agree with the person who's speaking? I think I do, but I'm not exactly sure what he said, you know. He said this and I see these people laughing, and that makes me not so sure if I agree with him or not. Why? What do I know about these people? I don't know, right? But different ideas, they go through your mind and whatnot. And so that's another thing too. You know, if you're in a class and they're able to make the class very interesting with the topics they talk about and the subject matter they talk about, that's very helpful for pulling you through those deep waters of a language you're not familiar with.
Yeah, definitely. For example, I was telling you, I had these classes in English, and one of the most interesting subjects that I had was it was history of English, and it was very interesting. I like history too, so it was really interesting to check the way English developed through the centuries, and that helped me a lot too because I had to read in English. I had the class in English, and it was we had this information that I really wanted to acquire, and it was in English. So I was fully motivated in certain ways.
Yeah.
Definitely. But also, on the other hand, I could also see the frustration on some of my classmates.
Yeah.
Like some of them were like, "Come on, they don't like history, or they didn't like history at the time." And
Yeah.
they were bored with the information. They couldn't understand the teacher pretty well, so they were not motivated at all. So
Yeah.
it happened in ways.
Yeah, that's I can see that. I can see that very clearly. And your situation in a classroom that was only English, I feel is distinct from this kind of battle between philosophies of whether in an English classroom where the subject is learning a language, let's say it could be English classroom or the Chinese classroom or the Spanish classroom or whatever, where the philosophy is you never use the L1 in the class. You only use the L2 in the class.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. The higher the levels go up, but in the lower levels, I'm inclined to say I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it as me, the learner. I'm open to the fact that for other people, maybe that works. I'm open to that. For me, the learner, I don't agree with it at all. I'm not going to tolerate taking a Chinese class where my first day of class and I know nothing about Chinese. The teacher just gets up and just explains everything in Chinese. No, I'm going to be tempted to break a bottle over that teacher's head. I won't do that, of course, but but I can visualize it.
Yeah.
And no, I wouldn't tolerate that. It's imagine if I'm only going to take 3 hours of Chinese a week, and those 3 hours I go and listen to somebody speak Chinese to me about this thing or some other thing, or who knows what they're trying to teach me. They just start writing characters on the board or whatever. I have no idea. No idea what's going on, what they're talking about. There's no way, And no, I want a teacher who knows both Chinese and English, or Chinese and Spanish, to explain what the hell it is that we're doing, what it is that you're trying to show me, and yeah, I got to have some sort of grasp of it. You can't even take an object like a ball and put it up and say a word to me and expect me to know what you're talking about. That doesn't work for me. Let's say you have a ball in your hand and you say some word in Chinese. What am I supposed to assume? Are you saying ball? Are you saying sphere? Are you saying round? Are you saying are you saying sports? Are you saying catch? What? I don't have no idea what you're saying. Give me a clue. I'm not
Yep.
a baby, and I'm not going to be around Chinese 24/7 at the spending my first 3 years screaming to bring me some milk. Not going to learn that way.
Yeah. You know
So
what? When you
yeah,
mentioned that, just like that, when you mentioned that, I told you that I also studied French, but that was just my second language. So I only had 4 courses of French in school. And I remember that when I had the first course in French, well, obviously I didn't have any clue about French at the time. I only knew merci or s'il vous plaît, and that was pretty much it.
yeah,
And the teacher also, she started giving the class in French and in Spanish too. I mean, she explained certain things in Spanish, but she used French. And one of my classmates, and he was very good at English, he was frustrated with the French class.
yeah,
He was even angry. He was like, you know, I didn't learn English in this way.
yeah.
That was the way I learned English. So I don't want to learn French in this. He was really, really upset about that class. He was frustrated with that.
That would
And
probably be me too.
and now that I think about that, I'm also thinking about that we're talking, well, over here we've been talking about monolingual classes, because I mean my whole life I've been with people who speak Spanish, so even if we didn't know what the teacher was saying, we could, you know, classmates and I could use Spanish to communicate. But what about multilingual classes? Have you ever been in a multilingual class where your classmates were from some other countries?
Uh, no, I haven't been, and that's another thing. You know, they have the ESL and the EFL, and those are kind of, you know,
Huh?
remember, you know, English is a second language and English as a foreign language, and
Foreign language.
they
Yeah.
make the distinction between those two kinds of classes. You know, when all the students are from the same place and when all of the students are from all different places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm thinking about that because that's the thing. I mean, over here we can use L1 because everybody's, well, has the same L1.
yeah,
But I'm trying to imagine what a class would be. Well, what a class would be if we had different languages. I
yeah.
mean, if I spoke Spanish, the other person spoke a, I don't know, Arabic, how would it be?
Yeah, it's difficult, and you make a good point. You make a good point when you talk. You know, when people say, you know, only use the L2 in the classroom. Um, those kinds of situations, it's hard to argue against that. And definitely, if I were going to have to teach a class of that nature with students that were from all different parts of the world, there's no doubt I would go with other teachers that have more experience with something like that and ask them, hey, you know, what kind of things work for you when you're doing this? Or what are the most effective things? Because, you know, even if I were to go to another country, let's say Korea, or I don't know, China, or who knows where, Saudi Arabia, and to teach English in another country, um, where I don't know that native language, where I don't know the language native to those countries, that's even different, you know. I could say to those students, say, look, I don't know your language. I'm going to try to teach you mine,
Mm-hmm.
and I got it. Let's have a contest. Let's see who can learn whose language faster. So as I teach you in this course, English, I'm going to be learning your language on the outside. We're going to see who learns fastest. Okay, we have to the end of the semester. Let's see what we can do at the end of the semester, and let's see how well we can do. You know, and on the outside, I'll try to learn your language, and then you try to learn mine. You know, and even then, it's not fair, right? Because I'm surrounded by that language. You know, and all they get is my class. You know, for the language. Even then, it's not fair. But at the same time, I would try something, you know, to learn the language or try, you know, to get, because why not? You know, it's a good tool to have to be able to know the language of the people you're teaching your native language to. I remember I had somebody come to observe one of my classes one day, and it was somebody who I had a very strong disagreement about whether to use L1 in the classroom or not. And so when she came, of course, I explained things in the way that you mentioned at the beginning of this, where I might say that the present perfect is like this, and it compares to the Spanish in this way. And I knew that she did not like that. And I knew that she hated it. So I especially wanted to do it that way since she was there. So she came, she was very nice after the session, and she says, well, I think you did really well and this and this, and you made a good, you had a good rapport with the students. But she says, let me ask you this. If you were in Vietnam giving this class, how would you have taught that lesson to Vietnamese students? And I said, look, I know where you're going with this. And I said, it's a good point. It's a good point. I said, but my answer to you is, if I have a classroom full of students and I want to help them learn, I said, I'm going to use whatever tool I have at my disposal. And if one of those tools is knowledge of how their language works and how I can, make a connection, not a clean translation, but a connection, so that you can see, like, look, you do this in your language and it looks like this. We do this in our language and it looks like this. It's a different logic, it's a different structure, but at least you understand, you have a point of reference to know that when you see this in English, this is what it's doing communication-wise.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm able to do that with my students, why wouldn't I? If I'm not able to, then yeah, I've got to look for a way to make it work. True. But if I'm in a situation where I can do this and it works, why wouldn't I do that? So those are good points when you have a classroom full of students from different places.
Mm-hmm.
And they're beginners. Because it's one thing if they have a certain level, everybody can come together. I'm going to sneeze.
I do.
It's kind of dusty in this room.
Bless you, bless you.
Usually there's two, so we'll see if there's another one.
Look, about that, have you ever read Jeremy Harmer?
Who?
Jeremy Harmer.
I know that name, yeah. I think, I don't know if I have any books of his or not.
Yeah, he's written a lot of books about language learning and teaching.
Yeah.
And with the Prony teachers, we were talking about that last year, I remember, because we also had this, we had grammar, but we also had these classes in which they reflect about the way they have to use English in the classroom.
Yeah.
And this author, Jeremy Harmer, he comments on the way that these only L2 classes started. And he commented that basically it was because there were a lot of trainers or teachers, let's say, who spoke only English and not the other language. So when they went to other countries and they had to teach English, so they were not able to communicate in the L1.
Yeah.
So students basically have to use English all the time. That's what he mentions in that. So we were thinking about that, and from there we have we have some other theories and papers, but since then we had a lot of this idea that English classes, language classes, have to be given or have to be provided in L2.
Yeah.
We were talking about that, and we were and as teachers with the Prony teachers, we were talking about that, and I told them that I worked in a school for some years, and that was a policy. I mean, it was like we were supposed to give our classes only in English, so Spanish was not allowed. But when I was there, I could see my students' frustration. I mean, not all of them, but some of them. They were like, "What?" And they were trying to use Spanish. And if the coordinator was, if she was walking by or something, and she listened to you in Spanish, she was like, "Hey, teacher, why are you using Spanish?" I was like, "No, I'm just I was just trying to clarify something, but okay, that's enough. And they were very strict about that. And that goes to your point that about true beginners. I had some students who were beginners, but I mean, not true beginners. They already knew, certain words, expressions. But I also had some students that were true beginners. You know what? Especially people who were retired from work, people who just wanted to learn because they had the time to do it or they wanted to do something with their free time. They were really true beginners. And for them,
like in their
those,
60s.
yeah, 65, 70.
Yeah. Okay.
And for those students, it was almost impossible to follow the class.
Yeah.
And some of them told me, they told me directly, you know what? No, please use Spanish because, well, in Spanish, right? I don't understand squat of what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay.
Oh, and I don't know, a lot of theories behind that. It's easy to see that the older somebody gets, the more comfortable they become with just telling people that, you know what, no, this doesn't work for me. And
yeah.
I think the percentage of people that are that way decreases the younger you go. People feel more shy about saying, you know what, no, this isn't working for me. Maybe because they don't know what does work for them. I don't know, but it depends on what people are doing. I'm sure that there are some people, or many people, who kind of have this idea about language of, I'm going to pay for a class, or I'm going to go to school, and for the money that I'm paying, it's someone else's job to teach me. And okay, but there are other learners that are like, well, if I'm going to pay for this class, it's I'm going to squeeze every drop out of that professor that I can and get this information. The latter, either A, does not want you to speak the L2 in the classroom, or yes, speak the L2, but wants you to explain things in L1, or two, just doesn't care, right? If it's L2 or L1, because they're going to get everything, there are some students that are in defense mode and just waiting for everything to come to them, and other students are in very attack mode, right? So I'm going to pay money for this teacher so that I don't have to feel guilty about ripping the teacher apart to get the information that I want.
Yeah.
If it's just my uncle who I know is a teacher and I'm not paying him, I would feel guilty about ripping that guy apart to get the information I want. But now I can pay this person. I can do whatever I want to this person. I can scream at them or get angry or do whatever until I get the information the way I want it. Then, and don't cry because I'm paying you. Some learners are like that, and I think other learners, they just kind of like there's this, in an only L2 classroom, there's this kind of mysteriousness about it, and this, oh, wow, it's so interesting to hear that person speak this way throughout the class. And some people like that. And you can't take that away from them. It's not the way I learn, but some people do. And I can definitely understand the philosophy that brought about this idea that only L2 in the classroom. But I've been in the past, I've been called out. Somebody, again, another story where somebody came to observe the class, and I remember one where one of the students say, "Teacher, what does the word still mean?" Of course, it can mean a lot of things, but in the context, I think, we're talking about aún or todavía.
Yeah.
And so I just explained that to the student. I just said that, well, it means like todavía, right? Okay, thanks. Man, I got raked over the coals by this person observing the class, I mean, finger in the face and everything, you know. He says, we do not use ever, right, the L1 in the classroom. I was like, come on, just stop.
Yeah.
I mean, do you belong to a religious cult
You know,
that gets together and burns English Spanish dictionaries? You know, what? I mean, you might as well be telling me that English Spanish dictionaries are devil worship stuff, because
yeah,
that's essentially all the student was wanting to know. You know, how do I say this word in English? Or what does that word that you just said in English mean in Spanish? That's all they wanted to know. You know, they paid for the course. Tell them what they want to know. Don't take them on a journey through the haunted forest for 2 hours trying to paint a picture that finally gets them there, when you can just like that in 1 second get them there. Stupid, stupid.
they satanized the L1, right?
The what?
So they satanized
Yeah,
the L1.
I mean, they certainly made it feel that way.
Yeah. You know, about that, well, yeah, basically, look, what I was telling you, when I was in university, I mean, I also liked these L2 classes. I mean, that English was used most of the time. I liked them because as a learner, you know what I do, or what I did when I was learning, I usually I copied expressions and I threw out them into my lexicon. You know, I tried to use them whenever I could. So I did that a lot. And when I listened to some teachers, you know, like I listened to a teacher say an expression or a word, and I was like, okay, I had never heard that before. And I used to just write it down. And when I had the chance to come out and use that one, so I just did it. That helped me too. I mean, that was cool. That was cool in that way. But now, as you're mentioning, well, now as a teacher and also as a learner, because now I am 34, and now I understand more what I like and what I don't like. So now I understand that, yeah, there are some cases in which I can't, well, or L1 should be used, and some other cases in which L2 has to be used. Yeah, I agree with that. And like what you were mentioning with the word, so in some cases, a bad point of teaching is when you know, your teacher tries to explain the word to you with a lot of meaning or a lot of definition, like this word is this, when simply you can say a word like this,
Yeah,
and you know,
yeah,
and use that valuable time in some other thing.
Yeah, that's, and as a student in a class, I literally I will tear a teacher apart for something like that. If I ask what the meaning of a word is, if they start going into this thing, yeah, I will cut them off while they're doing it. I've done it before. I said, no, just tell me what the word is. Tell me what the word is. Okay, everything that you're doing right now, I can do it instantly in my head if you just tell me what the word is. I don't need to see all this other stuff. You know, if you don't tell me when I leave the class, I'm just going to go look in the dictionary anyway. You know, so you're not losing anything by just telling me what it is in the language. I mean, I think you're kind of frozen up there. I don't know if can you still hear me?
I can hear you, yeah, but
yeah,
I can hear you.
Yeah,
still frozen?
Your image is frozen there.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see over here, su conexión a internet es inestable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you just put cardboard.
Well, it's working, but can you?
Yeah, you just move like that.
I can hear you loud and clear.
No, that's good. That's good.
Oh, geez.
But yeah, you know, nobody should tolerate that. So yeah, I mean, only L1, well, not only L1, but only L2 in the classroom, or a mixture of L1 and L2. Really, if I had to really put my chips down on a really particular belief about it, I would say, don't be so religious about it. You know, if you can help a student one way, help the student that way. If you can help a student another way, you know, at the end of the day, it's about the learner. It's not about the teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I don't know. What do you think? I think there are a lot of schools, a lot of institutes that that count on their students being these types of passive learners, and as part of their marketing, they always advertise that with us you're going to be fluent in 6 months, and
Yeah.
with this you're going to be, you know, and of course, you know, it's you, I mean, it's too far to say that it's false advertising, but if somebody does learn in 6 months, it's because of what the learner did and not what you, the school, did. But you know, the school can always help, of course, but I think these schools have kind of gotten themselves into a place where they feel like they need to be the center of that customer's language learning universe. And you know, where this feeling is like the only place that you're going to have any sort of language experience is with us, and we want that experience to be with us, right? You know, and I think that's unfortunate for a learner to get caught up in that and not understand it. And again, I can't, you know, I can't speak for every learner out there, but you know, the learner who really aggressively wants to learn something, and you see the advertisement, you're going to be fluent with us in 6 months. Yeah, you're going to be very angry at that school for all of those 6 months for not giving you the things that you know you're wanting. And you know, use the school to your advantage. But if you're taking classes that you can't ask questions, or you can't stop the teacher halfway through to say, no, that doesn't make sense to me, or you can't, you know, that don't allow you to squeeze every drop of knowledge that you can out of the teacher, then probably it's better to spend the money elsewhere. Again, if you're a proactive, aggressive learner that really wants to learn fast. But you know, the real world, if you're in a situation where you're in a real world setting where you can talk to, you know, for example, in the US where I learned Spanish, I wasn't in a Spanish speaking country, but I managed to get into a lot of circles of only Spanish speakers. And so, especially on the weekends or whatever, and that was a real world setting enough. If you wanted to talk with these people, you had to make it work in Spanish. So no classroom was going to offer me that, especially no classroom that was just the language.
Yeah.
You know, if I take a history class that was in Spanish, that's something that's, you know, like at your university, you're taking classes that are in Spanish, but the subject of the class is not the language itself. It's the language is that secondary thing. It's the vehicle that they use to do the class. A class like that would be very helpful. But yeah, I don't know. It's everybody's different, you know, and so it's funny because I feel like if I'm going to aggressively learn a language, I will get much more out of a class if the teacher is explaining how that language works to me. I'll get a lot more out of that class if the teacher is explaining how that language works in a language that I can understand. And, you know, and let me deal with the rest. I'll, you know, but that's, you know, that's for the learner to decide at the end of the day. And I don't want to be the teacher that imposes one particular way. Say again?
Yeah, about that, about those schools. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I was reading an article about that. You know, for example, my teachers from Prony, these teachers, they had the idea that English classes well, or these classes had to be taught in L2. So as you were mentioning, that was a golden rule, and you were not able to break that rule.
Yeah.
And after we had this reflection, or this class in which we read about all of this, and we had this reflection, they changed, and they were like, okay, so really, are we allowed to use Spanish? And I say, well, I'm not saying, it's not me who's saying that. I mean, I brought you this text, I brought you these authors. They are published authors, and they say this, and we have this research, so we should have a go at, at L1 as well. And I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago, and this author, this writer, was saying that some of these, these L2 classes are started or continues because of some private schools, because they feel, or you feel, that they are more prestigious when they advertise themselves, like, okay, in here we only teach in English, and we only speak English, and that's it. And you, as a learner, you say, oh wow, in that school they teach in English or in French or in Chinese, and they won't use Spanish at all. So I need to be there. I need to be in that school. And when you go to that school and you pay a certain amount of money, and you want your money to be worth it, and if the teacher starts using L1, so you, the learner who's investing money, would be like, what? Am I paying for this?
Yeah.
I didn't pay for this, even though you're not learning anything.
Yeah.
Even though you don't understand anything, but it's like, come on, I didn't pay for this. I paid for you to teach me in English or in any other language that you have there. So they commented on that he commented on that we still continue with this point of view because of private schools. They want to feel more prestigious in that way. We were commenting on those schools that, yes, advertise themselves in that way. And also, even though with that, if you come with us, you will only have classes in English, and in half a year, in 6 months, you will be able to be fluent or to speak English. And when some people ask me, teacher, is that true? I usually say, okay, it depends on what speaking means, right? I mean, I don't know what they mean when they say that you can speak English. Speak English in what or where or when? I don't know.
Well, I mean, when you have a situation where the entire university and all the courses that you're going to take in the university are taught in that language, I would say that there's a higher chance that in 6 months you're certainly going to be more advanced than you were 6 months before, if you don't die first along the way. But if you're just an institute and the only thing that you offer is the language class itself, and it's 3 hours a week, you definitely have nowhere to be making that promise, because it's not up to you, the school. It's really up to the learner. The learner will decide if they're going to, how fluent they're going to be in 6 months or not, and they have to put a lot into it. If they're at a university where all of their courses are in the L2, then obviously they're going to be putting a lot more effort into it. So, still I would not make that guarantee, but it's far more likely. It's going to be better in 6 months than what it was 6 months before. But so there's a lot of different elements to look at when you're thinking about that, because one of them is schools or universities or high schools that put all of their subjects into the L2, and you're really kind of in that world artificially, but you're kind of in that world, as opposed to just a language institute that only offers languages, that's 3 hours a week and says we only do our classes in L2. Now that that's not for me. I'll take the class in the L1, especially at beginner levels, and then I'll try to put those to work outside of class. But when I go to class, I just want a good explanation for this, or this, and hopefully you're answering my questions and not me trying to figure out stuff that you put on the board.
Yeah.
But in a one-on-one class, if somebody can afford it, if somebody has the time for it, if somebody has you know, the ability to take a one-on-one class, I think it's I think learners feel a lot more freedom to be that way, you know, with the teacher to be like, hey, you know, please answer this question for me, or please answer that. I think in a group, a lot of learners feel shy about, you know, taking over the session to have their own personal questions answered. So yeah, there's a lot of different things to think about.
Will you be talking about approaches too?
Approaches like what? Approaches to learning or to teaching?
Yeah. I have teaching approaches. For example, there is this one, the content and language integrated learning, which is basically that, in which you add subjects in order to, well, or you use subjects in order to teach English, like history or biology or geography. You know, like grammar translation, all those approaches. Yeah. Will you be talking about those?
You mean like in another podcast or?
Yeah, in another one, yeah.
It's something that could be talked about, sure. I've got kind of a list that I made of different, you know, topics to talk about and whatnot, but anything that somebody else can add to the list, sure, you know, regarding it, you know, as long as it's focused on the learner, yeah.
Yeah, that one is also pretty interesting because it's not like this thing that L1 and L2. When you check approaches, it's the same. In some approaches you use L2, in some other approaches you use a little bit of L1. So yeah, it's the same. It's just really debatable. So yeah, that would be another one that one would be really interesting too.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. It's and I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about, you know, the schools you go to that put all of their material in that language. I've thought about it in other contexts, but not this context. So yeah, that is kind of interesting. You have to think about that. Yeah. I was just looking at the time and it's almost 3 o'clock.
Oh yeah, right.
We've almost been at this for, well, I don't know. I think the first 15 minutes, I think it was about 15 minutes before we started recording, but
yeah 10 minutes to 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you start talking about these things, you can go on forever.
I know, you go on all day. The tricky thing, I'm gonna hit the stop record button here.
Yep.